Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to tonight's live stream. I am Jordan Harmon, co-founder and president of Angel Studios. We have here with us David Fisher, our incredible head of all of the business affairs and acquisitions at Angel. And we're going to be joined here, obviously, by the incredible Mike Rowe himself, the man, the myth, the legend.
That is awesome.
I've been a fan of Mike's since I was very young. We didn't actually have TV growing up, but I remember going to my cousin's house and watching the early Mike Rowe days, and that was my experience with him. And so it's been really fun to just interact with his team and what he's doing. But man, I hope the Guild is seeing this film. This film scored so high in the Angel Guild. We were like, we have to figure out how to collaborate on this film because it's such a great film. And he obviously released it in theaters, but it was in such a small time period. Not as many people that wanted to see it got to see it. So anyway, let's jump into America's favorite storyteller, Mike Rowe. Welcome to the live stream. We are so grateful to have you.
For the record, and thank you, Jordan, but that whole America's favorite storyteller thing, that wasn't me. I was just minding my own business, and somebody made up a really nice poster. And now it's true I didn't argue, but it wasn't my idea.
Well, I can't argue with it either. Whoever did that, brilliant. I know that when we were watching the film, my wife and I, she was just like, why is his voice so enchanting? I was like, I know. I'm like, sweetheart, I'm sitting right here. What?
Exactly. I don't let my wife listen to Mike. No.
Come on, guys, don't make it weird.
Oh, gosh. Anyway, well, anybody who hasn't seen the film yet, you can go to angel.com/stand right now and join the Angel Guild. And as a member of the Angel Guild, not only are you going to get to watch Something to Stand For with Mike Rowe, an incredible film that talks about historical figures in such a fascinating way. He does it in a way that it's almost like a game. You're sitting there, you're consuming the content, and you're watching it, but trying to guess what's going on and how it's all functioning. And so you have to go check out this amazing film. It got 98% on Rotten Tomatoes on the audience score, and the Guild scored it through the roof. It's one of the number one watch titles on Angel right now, and we are so excited about it. So go to angel.com/stand, join the Guild, support this film. This film, when you do this, you're not just supporting, this incredible film with Mike and his team, and it allows them to make more shows and films like this, but you're supporting this mission to tell stories that amplify light. So, David, obviously you were super involved through this whole process as we've kind of gotten to the finish line of getting this out into the world. Man, what a crazy few weeks as we were diving into this. Tell us about that, David, and that experience.
Yeah, honestly, when you come across projects that are hitting the Guild, you always want to know where is our Guild actually gravitating toward. We've got over 370,000 Guild members today, and it continues to grow. And so we want to deliver the right kind of content to the Guild. And when we got into a conversation with Mike and his team, and I got to tell you, I'm working with Mike's business partner, Mary Sullivan, and Mary was incredible to work with, but she was tough, Jordan. I'm telling you that she was so tough, and I consider myself semi-tough, but I am no match. I just, by the time we got done with it, I was just very, very excited to bring a project that has so much heart. And it meets people where they're at. That's one of the things that you do, Mike. You meet people where they're at. There's a style that you've learned over the last many years and decades. You've learned how to actually connect with an audience. And you got to understand, Guild members that are watching this and whoever sees this, Mike is looking at a camera. He's looking at a green dot. He's looking at a piece of machinery. And that is the beauty of these filmmakers and these creatives, is Mike is actually able to connect with us by looking at a lens. And that is not easy. And we don't take it for granted, Mike. We are so blessed to have you and Mary and Chuck and the whole team as a part of the Angel family.
Well, thanks. And one shameless plug deserves another. So let me say this about the Guild. I get it. When Dirty Jobs went on the air back in 2002, maybe 2003, one of the things that I learned real quick I had an idea for maybe half a dozen, maybe a dozen segments that I really wanted to do. That project, incidentally, was a tribute to my granddad, and I never thought it would turn into a hit, much less a series, much less a franchise, much less launch 30 or 40 other shows in cable. I just wanted to pay an honest tribute to real working people. But what I learned really, really quickly was if you ask the viewer what they want, and if you actually listen to them, in this case through social media and chat rooms, this was before Facebook was really a thing or any of the normal channels, I had this thing, I called it the mud room, and I invited viewers to always join me in there, be honest about what you liked about the last episode, and then most importantly, tell me where I should go next. People have been telling me where to go my whole life, but in this case, I knew there was something important about giving the fate of the show to the viewer. And I've often said that show taught me that the best programmers in the world are the viewers, and the best hosts in the world, in my case anyway, were the people we profiled. And so that's really when I learned, I'm a better guest than I am a host. I'm an okay host.
You literally had created the Angel Guild before the Angel Guild. To some degree, that's what you're doing.
Well, there are no new ideas, right? Some ideas feel super new when you Forrest Gump your way into them and go, oh, wow. But, any fan of history, and I talked to your brothers about this when they came on my podcast. They were talking about the Statue of Liberty and the torch, right? And the way that super early crowd-funded kind of thing got the statue built. And I was just so delighted to hear about all that, because I had written a story a few years before that was almost in this movie, but we didn't have time for any more. We wanted to keep it under 2 hours. But it was the story not of the torch on the Statue of Liberty, or even the Statue of Liberty itself, but of the pedestal.
Yes.
They didn't have the money. They needed a few $1 million to build a pedestal for Lady Liberty to stand on. And it was Pulitzer who went to the people of New York City and encouraged them, not the wealthy set, but anybody who cared about liberty, to cough up a few pennies. And they published the names of the donors in the paper. And so the base, the foundation of liberty, was built by regular people in New York City who wanted to give this lady a place to stand.
You were gonna put this in the movie, and then you didn't have time. This is literally Angel's brand and origin story.
I know. Look.
This is incredible.
I was literally sitting in this chair in this studio talking to your brothers, and getting agitated as I learned more about everything you guys went through, all the stuff with Disney and all of the different experiments. And your adventures in advertising, right? With the poo-pourri and the squatty potty or whatever all that stuff was. It was so interesting to me because I cut my teeth on the QVC cable shopping channel in the middle of the night back in 1989 and 1990, trying to figure out a way to sell a product and tell a story at the same time. So, the Venn diagrams for Mike Rowe and the Angel Guild, they sit right atop one another.
Incredible.
So
that's absolutely incredible.
Look, I mean, this is terribly clever, and I will take credit for, but I think I said it to David, and hopefully it'll wind up in an ad somewhere. But when I started looking for a place that this movie could call home, something to stand for, I wanted to find a home that stood for something. And that's not a garden variety streamer. God bless them, I subscribe to all of them. But you guys are different. You're discriminating. You have a you have standards, and I was flattered to see that the movie not only passed the Guild but did so with flying colors, and from what I'm told, David, pretty quickly in relative terms.
Very quickly.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, when we do the Guild, when a movie comes into the Guild, we have an awesome team that works with our filmmakers for that, and they look for statistical significance. They want to make sure that the project isn't spiking on one day and getting really low on another day. So we wait, kind of like an election, for it to even off, and then we can call that it's passed or it hasn't. We got to statistical significance almost overnight with yours. It went up and it just stayed up the entire time. So it wasn't erratic, and that's almost a first for us. And of course it belongs to you, Mike.
And if you're just joining us, go to angel.com/stand. Please join the Angel Guild and support Mike and his incredible film and his team. This is obviously, we love their team and we're excited to work with them on many things into the future. But some of the reviews, they're just incredible. One said, Mike Rowe never disappoints. This is a wonderfully crafted film that shares some amazing stories. Well done. Another one said, this movie was very inspiring and should be watched by all Americans. I really enjoyed it and learned so many things that I never knew before. It's not just inspiring, it is so entertaining. When you sit down to watch this film, one of the things that's really important and that we've noticed with the Angel Guild is they're not just picking the films and the stories that are, great production values and beautiful, but they're actually going and selecting things that are the highest quality of storytelling. This is really storytelling first. And it just so happens that he's doing it around a message and this patriotic message that's super compelling. Another person said, I love all things Mike Rowe. I think we're all in that same boat. He says, as a Marine Corps veteran, this was so emotional to watch. The history that I learned will be with me forever. Thank you for making this, Mike.
That's so sweet. Look, in the spirit of no new ideas and in giving credit where it's due, two things. First, my dad was a history teacher, and he taught me early on that it's just storytelling, and the trick for a good teacher or a good filmmaker or a good author, if you can make history interesting for people who don't care about history, then you win. It's only the hardest thing to do in our chosen field. There are lots of different stories you can tell, and there are lots of different genres you can play in. But to really bring history to life in a way that feels both relevant and personal, that's easier said than done. And for me, aside from watching my dad do that as a boy, I listened to Paul Harvey fairly religiously growing up, and I'm sure most of the Guild members know of his old radio show called The Rest of the Story. And it was such a fun way to learn something you didn't know about somebody you do. And I always wanted to try and tell those kinds of stories. I can still hear his voice coming through the little transistor radio up by the wood pile where my dad and my grandfather and I cut the wood that fed the wood stoves that kept our house warm. And Paul was always there telling us these stories, And I promise I'll land the plane on this, it's relevant, but I missed a flight one day when I was in my late 20s, early 30s, I guess. I drove to BWI Airport. I was just I parked in long-term parking. I was running late. I had to move quick if I was going to make it, but Paul was in the middle of one of his stories. And you can't get out of the car. You can't turn off a story like that until you hear the reveal and hear him say, and now you know the rest of the story. Well, that's what the way I heard it started as. That was my podcast, and the stories in this film were hand-selected from 300 that I wrote for the podcast that were brought to life for television over the last 5 or 6 years. And when it occurred to us that we could stitch these things together, in time for Independence Day, which is why it was such a limited run. We didn't have a big runway, and I didn't write these things with the intention of turning them into a movie. I wrote them mostly to pass the time on a plane, and then they wound up on a podcast, and then they wound up in a book, and then they wound up on TV, and now so it's like, I guess my point is, you can't script that kind of thing, but you can play the cards that you get. And I was very fortunate to have an enthusiastic audience stick with me over the years, and they love this kind of storytelling. And my big miscalculation, and where you guys really saved the day, was I spent 5 weeks promoting this movie leading up to a 1-week release in the theater. Nobody in their right mind does that, because I knew I was going to reach a lot of people who were not going to be able, for scheduling reasons, to get to the theater that week, or who were not going to be near a theater where this thing was airing. I knew that was going to happen, and I just hoped that I could get the right platform under me after the fact. And that's what's happening now. And I'm telling you, I can take criticism and I can take a compliment, but I've never seen reviews like this on anything I've ever worked on. And it's not just on the social channels. It's in comments under ads that you guys are running.
Usually people comment in ads, man, stop spamming my thread.
Stop with the ads. But no, they're like, more ads. It's so gratifying. And I just want to thank you both personally, and everybody who's listening, because in the end, me, you, Jordan, you, David, we all have the same boss. We work for the audience. And I get that. And it's super flattering to have them on board.
It totally is. One of the questions that we were thinking about was like the format of this film. For those who haven't seen it, again, go to angel.com/stand and join the Angel Guild. You can get early access right now to watch this incredible film, which again scored off the charts in the Guild. It scored 98% on audience score on Rotten Tomatoes. But the style is so interesting and unique from right out the get-go. It's got this mystery format. Like, what inspired that style for you? Like, what was the thought process there, and how did you get there?
Well, beyond Paul Harvey and my own personal affection for not just the format but the length. Like, when I started writing these stories, I build them as brief mysteries for the curious mind with a short attention span, because I knew we had entered into that phase of swiping left and scrolling, and most people don't have time to sit down and listen to Joe Rogan go on for 3.5 hours, or in many cases go to a theater. They just don't have the time. They don't have the bandwidth for it. So I wanted to write these short 6, 7, 8 minute stories, and that's why it's so outrageous that they wound up in a 2-hour movie. But it's the same mindset, Jordan. It's like a good movie will take you on a narrative journey that'll have a beginning and a middle and an end, and the characters will get fleshed out, and you'll go on a bit of a ride. Well, this movie does that, but it just does it in 9 separate occasions. They're 9 short stories, all featuring or focused on someone you've heard of. But the stories themselves tell you something you didn't know about that person. And in this case, the people that I focused on were the people who were instrumental in building our country, going all the way back to the mid-1700s and into the 1980s, right? Key people. And once I knew that those were the stories I wanted to tell, the question became, well, how do you stitch them together? And at the time I first started to think about this, it was impossible not to notice in the headlines that our statuary was under assault. Statues were coming down. They were being defaced. And there was such a giant conversation about this. And it just occurred to me that, it's something my dad used to say all the time. We're obligated in the present to look at history in the context of the time. It's imperative that we be able to do that. And I'm afraid we've kind of lost that ability. We've lost that nuance. It's so much easier, guys, to judge than it is to think. And we're living in this super judgmental time. And I thought, well, if I can tell these stories about these imperfect men who nevertheless forged this great country, if I can do it in a way that's both whimsical, different, truthful, but also cinematic and easy to digest, then maybe we have the makings of a different kind of formula. And so I honestly don't know what to call this thing. It's not quite a documentary because there are over 300 actors in it, all of whom came from Oklahoma, by the way. We shot 90% of this thing in Oklahoma. So you've got all these actors, but they're not really actors because the words coming out of their mouth are spoken in my voice, because we're really just taking a story that I tell from the stage of an empty theater, and we're intercutting it. So it's like part drunk history, part Paul Harvey. It's not quite Saving Private Ryan, but it's not a documentary either. It's this thing. And look, you guys know, because you've taken all sorts of chances in your career, there's only so much you can know. There's only so much you can do before you put it out there to see what people think. And it's a super exciting, horrifying, terrifying thing to do.
It's almost like part of your identity to some extent. I always have to tell myself that whatever we create and do creatively, I can't tie my identity completely to this because my identity is in something more important. But so what was the end hope? Like when someone walks out, let's say someone goes and joins the Angel Guild right now. They go to angel.com/stand, they go join the guild, they watch this film. What are you wanting them to get out of it?
First and foremost, I think it's gratitude. Not in an earnest, saccharine, or sappy way, but we need, in the same way we've lost our nuance with regard to how to process the past, I'm afraid we're, in some cases, the product of such a guilty conscience that we're unable to celebrate and truly be grateful for the incredible accomplishments that this country has achieved. Now, that's not to say we're finished. We're not. We're a work in progress, and we always will be. But we're living in a time when it's very difficult to celebrate or even acknowledge, much less be grateful for all of that progress, lest we appear tone deaf to the ongoing struggles that are still playing out. And so, I didn't write this for conservatives or liberals or Republicans or Democrats. I didn't write it for people who see themselves primarily through some political lens or ideological label. I wrote it for people who still see themselves as Americans, first and foremost, and can acknowledge our imperfections while at the same time celebrating our accomplishments. And really, I think most of us are, in fact, capable of doing that. I just think we're living in a time where we're discouraged from doing so. We don't know when to stand. We don't know when to kneel. We don't know if we should stand up when a woman enters the room, because if we do, there are a bunch of other dudes sitting there at the table who are all upset because we just made them look like chumps. And some of the women, they don't like it either. We don't know whether to hold the door. We don't know. We're confused about everything from pronouns to the language itself is shifting around us so quickly that there's confusion and there's ambiguity. But I wanted to do a movie that reminded us that it's not that complicated. incredibly brave, albeit imperfect men with everything to lose, signed a death warrant called the Declaration of Independence. Their lives, their security, their sacred honor. They weren't just rolling the dice and hoping for the best because, hey, why not? These were men of means. They were the one percenters of 1776. And the result of that risk, that gamble, that plays out on our national mall today. And so as we tell some of these stories and we take some cinematic liberties and we have a lot of fun with the recreations, they're all interspersed. I get in my old Bronco, I drive to DC, and I meet the park rangers who clean up these statues every morning, who clean up the sidewalks, who deal with the tourists and who deal with the protesters and who deal with all of it. So I promise you guys, those of you who are listening, who are tired of being lectured, this is not a lecture. It's not a sermon. It's not a finger-wagging scold session. It's none of that. It's just, it's storytelling in a way that entertains me and reminds me of my dad and my pop and Paul Harvey and the old woodpile and the kinds of history classes that left me feeling nourished as a kid and made me curious to learn more. I'll finish filibustering with this. You can't turn a tanker around, with a 2-hour movie. You can't do it. And you certainly can't do it with an 8-minute story. But what you can do is open a portal. I look at what you guys are doing, and I look at the business of storytelling in 2024 as the shallow end of the pool, right? I imagine a big built-in pool in the backyard, and the shallow end is the super accessible part. Anybody can hop in, and maybe you like the water, and maybe you're having a good time, and maybe you want to learn more, maybe you want to go deeper. Well, the deep end of the pool is as close as your smartphone. Start Googling, have yourself a second screen experience, go deeper, learn more. That's where I think the sweet spot is today. And I see it in so much of your other work. Sound of Freedom, Sound of Hope, any random episode of the Tuttle Twins. They pose
specifically the Mike Rowe one, season 3.
That one,
episode
modesty
1.
aside, really did stand out. You guys let me
episode.
sing a song about college debt on your highest rated series. That's some pretty high cotton. But you understand the point, right? You can't solve a problem even with a great story, but you can make people curious enough to want to hop in the deep end of the pool.
I love that analogy. That's actually a very profound analogy, because the entertainment space is definitely upstream from culture. Culture follows that, but it's about shifting someone's mindset and their heart just a little bit to where they jump into the deep end of the pool. It's such a great analogy.
But you gotta entertain first.
Yes.
This is the thing, man. I have so many friends in this space who make this, I'll call it a well-intended mistake. It's so easy to fall in love with, you just asked me, what do I want people to feel when they leave the theater or stream the movie? What am I shooting for? Well, first and foremost, I answered you honestly, but I also know that I can't reasonably expect them to take any sort of lesson from this thing unless they're engaged during the thing. And that applies to every hit you guys have ever had. When I saw the Titanic, you know what I did when I got home? I Googled Titanic.
Because exactly right.
Right? Because I wanted to know more about the Astors, of all people. Remember the guy sitting there as the water's rushing in, just calm as could be, in his tuxedo with his wife. Oh my God. I wanted to know, did that really happen? Did the captain?
Yes, and I remember Googling. The first thing I thought of? It's so funny you say that because I remember Googling, or not. Well, Google. I guess Titanic was forever ago, but I remember searching on the internet. I don't know if it was Google or what it was or Yahoo, but it was about the band that was playing. I was like, what was it like? Is this real? Like, was this band just like going down? And it, that actually happened. It was crazy.
Can you imagine 4 guys, a cello, a violin, a viola playing "Nearer My God to Thee" as the boat's going down, right?
Unbelievable.
So it's a really interesting intersection that we occupy. The obligation to tell a story with as much truth and verisimilitude as you can muster, but it is cinema, and we get to cast, and we get to choose all sorts of other things, and we have an incredible amount of trust, I think, that's given to us, but we also have an obligation to get it right. But I'll still say the biggest obligation, first and foremost, is to entertain. I don't care if you're Jim Cameron. I don't care if you're Clint Eastwood. It just doesn't matter how earnest your mission is. You must entertain.
100%.
I'd love to go back on something that you were talking about, just to get a little bit of the backstory here, because if there's something that has entertained the Guild for a while now, it has been one of our animation shows that you know quite well. And you actually did work with Angel before, Something to Stand For. How did that all even come about? How did you get involved with us in that particular show?
So the Tuttle Twin thing happened because I was in Memphis maybe 2 years ago at something called Freedom Fest. And I was on stage giving some sort of speech, and the guy who hired me had read somewhere that I was a lifetime member of the Barbershop Harmony Society, right? Formerly known as SPEBSQUA, the Society for the Preservation and Encouragement of Barbershop Quartet Singing in America. And so this guy hired a barbershop quartet, and they were in the audience. And at some point during this presentation, 3 of them come up, the tenor, the lead, and the baritone, leaving me to sing bass. And just like that, they call it woodshedding. You're singing a song you kind of know with some guys you've never met. Best done in a woodshed, like where nobody can hear you. But in this case, I was right on stage in front of 2,000 people. So in the audience, I think it might have been Johnny Vance.
Yeah, Johnny.
Yeah. And so this kid comes up to me afterwards and was like, "Mike Rowe, Dirty Jobs guy. I had no idea you could sing." I'm like, "Well, call it what you will. I did do 7-8 years in the Baltimore Opera a long time ago. And yeah, I was in a quartet for a while." And then he basically pitches me as I'm being whisked off to the next appearance. He's like, "I work on the Tuttle Twins. We love your message at Mike Rowe Works. We don't think college is the best path for the most people. If I write you a song about that, would you sing it?" He really put the arm on me, like hard, right there in front of everybody. So I said, "Yeah, sure." Well, this guy goes off and he writes this
entire episode.
He writes a whole song and he puts me at the center of the episode. And when I looked at the treatment, I thought, no, this is full disclosure. My level of hubris is such. I mean, I'm modest where I have to be, but when it comes to like the creative stuff, like I write my own songs. I write all the jingles on my podcast unsolicited for advertisers, and then I sing them in 4-part harmony, not for them, because it amuses me, right? This is a thing I do for me. So he sends me an MP3, and he sends me the script, and I can't make it better. It's exactly what I mean to say. It's exactly why I formed the Mike Rowe Works Foundation. It's exactly why we've awarded $12 million in work ethic scholarships to help train the next generation of plumbers, steam fitters, pipe fitters, mechanics, and welders. He went to school on Dirty Jobs and on my foundation, and he wrote this song about not all roads lead to a college town. And it's kind of this weird Scott Joplin-y ragtime sort of thing. And I got it right away, and we recorded it, and then it popped up, and I saw the episode, and I just thought, man, that's how stuff is supposed to get made.
Yes.
That's how it's supposed to happen. A weird mix of talent, intentionality, and randomness. And this, I think, is really important and worth riffing on for a moment, because it's a lesson I keep learning over and over. But in Johnny's case, he's got a new season of shows to deliver. We're clearly aligned on some big ideas, but he's not really looking for me. He just happens to be at Freedom Fest in the audience, and then he sees me and he hears me sing, and then like that. He called me the other day. I hope I'm not talking out of school, but he said, it's the highest rated episode we've done. And I'm like,
oh,
really?
Yes, it is. It is. It's been viewed millions and millions and millions and millions of times.
Well, so look, that's, I'll take the credit if you want to give me some, but it's not, that show rated, not because of me, but in this case, it was entertaining, but man, the message in that episode, the idea, right? We've got $1.7 trillion in outstanding student loans right now. And we're still telling a whole generation of kids that they're screwed without a college degree.
Yep.
It's so bananas. We've got 8 million open positions, most of which don't require a 4-year degree. And we're just loading these kids up on a level of debt they're never going to be able to pay back. And I just, I do what I can in my lane every day to push back on that. But you probably did more good helping me with that cause by writing a song and letting my animated superego sing it on that show than I do, in a deliberate way. But it just goes back to, what is the story you want to tell? How do you want to tell it? How much time do you want to spend telling it, right? And the Tuttle Twins is a very different proposition than Dirty Jobs, which was a very different proposition than Something to Stand For. But they're all adjacent. It's all just, in my case, it's just me doing what I've done for 22 years, which is tap the country on the shoulder and say, hey, what about him? What about her? Get a load of that. Did you hear the one about ... And if that, if that turns into a song or a Paul Harvey homage or a movie or a podcast or a book, those are the tools in our box. We got to use them all.
I love that. I absolutely love that, man.
Amazing.
Again, those who are just joining us, we obviously have Mike Rowe here with us. His newest film is just released into the Angel Guild, Something to Stand For with Mike Rowe. It's an incredible film. You can go to angel.com/stand and join the Angel Guild. Obviously, when you join the Angel Guild, you get early access to his film, but you also get 2 free tickets to every Angel theatrical release. You get discounts on merchandise and early access to any other Angel releases that we do over the next years. But man, Mike, we're super grateful for your partnership and what you do for the world. It's a great honor to even be associated with you and your storytelling. It's these type of stories and these type of weekends that make the long nights, the difficult trenches that we go through to build up these companies to try to make an impact on the world, is these type of moments where you see the audience's response and you see the impact it's having that makes it all worth it.
Well, look, Kevin Costner got it right as Ray Kinsella, right, in Field of Dreams. If you build it, they will come. You just have to build it right. And you have to, look, there's no playbook for what you guys are constructing over there. And there's certainly no playbook for the right way to make a movie or the right way to run a foundation or the right way to try and shape a career. A way is the right way. Pick the way, and stick with it. You know, I mentioned before this weird mix of spontaneity and intentionality, and trying to balance those two things is a thing that's always interested me. And when I said, you know, I spend a lot of time learning the same lessons over and over, it was really funny making this movie. This is Dirty Jobs was the opposite of intentional. The show was intentional, but there was no script, there was no pre-production, there was very little actual production, there was no focus group, there was no casting, there were no second takes on that show. Everything was fly on the wall perspective and seat of your pants production, and I loved it. Right, that became kind of my stock and trade in nonfiction TV, letting the viewer see the process of a thing getting made. That served me well. This movie is the opposite. These stories were all very carefully written, workshopped, and then recorded, and so I was a little anxious going into this because I hadn't made a movie before. And I don't, you know, you mentioned Mary Sullivan earlier, David. Well, quick sidebar on her. I don't have an agent. I don't have a manager. I don't have a publicist. I learned years ago that I needed a lawyer, and I got her. And she also wears all of those different hats. You know, Jordan, you mentioned my team several times, and I appreciate that because we're nothing without our backstop. And I said to Mary with this thing, I said, you know, does it worry you at all that a guy known for no scripts is going in to make a movie with a shooting schedule that's all based on a script? And she said, frankly, yes, it does a little bit. It does. But we got through all of it, and I was really happy. And then we went to D.C. to shoot these somewhat unscripted encounters with things like park rangers, and like I wanted to meet some people and just have a conversational component in the movie, and that's there. But it was all planned. Like I knew the park ranger I was going to meet, and when it came time to walk through the Korean Memorial, and then the Jefferson Memorial, and then the World War II Memorial, you know, there was a big X on the ground where I would stop. And the cameras were all placed, and the lights were just so. And it was all very rehearsed, and I hate that. I just hate it. But I knew we had to do it because that's how you make a movie. And I'm in the middle of one of these stand-ups at the World War II Memorial. And to be honest, I'm a little overcome by this. I don't know if you've been there, but when you see all those stars on the wall, each one representing 1,000 dead, it's mind-boggling. It's just so heavy and epic, right? So I'm in the middle of doing one of these stand-ups. I walk to my ex and I look at that little green dot, right? In this case, a red dot on the camera, and I say what I want to say. And frankly, I thought I killed it. It's a pretty good job. But over my shoulder, right before the mandatory second take, I see an honor flight, right? Now, these honor flights come in and out of D.C. all the time. This is an organization that takes mostly old men from all over the country, and it brings them to the Capitol to see these monuments. And so this is about, I don't know, maybe a dozen old men, some in wheelchairs, some with walkers, but a lot of gray beards, right? And I noticed one guy in a wheelchair, and I don't know why I did this. You're not supposed to do this on a movie, but I said, guys, hang on a sec. And then I looked at the DP and I said, follow me. All right, director of photography, he's got the camera on his shoulder. Another one takes the camera off the tripod, and the director's like, what are you doing? I'm like, I want to go talk to these guys. Now, we got no releases, we have no permission to do this, but all that old, like Dirty Jobs inertia kicked in, and
you're like, we're going.
I just was compelled, you know. I just felt like I needed to do this. So I go over, I introduce myself. He knows who I am. This guy, his name's Andy Michael. He's 91 years old. Turns out he grew up not too far from where I did. Turns out we both enjoyed a certain bar and restaurant not far from our mutual zip code. Turns out he was in the Korean War. Turns out he was in the same battle that my dad was in the
Holy
Korean
smokes.
War. Now, my dad's also 91 years old. Now, what happens next is that Johnny Vance moment at Freedom Fest, where you don't know what your days, you just don't know any of this stuff. But I asked Andy, what it felt like to be here. And this old guy takes a deep breath and he looks up at all those gold stars, and the tears are rolling down his impossibly leathered face. And he says what he says to me. I won't spoil it because it's in the movie. But I'll tell you this, man. When an unscripted moment featuring a very old man who turned out to have fought with your dad sums up the entire intention of the movie, when you see him overcome with the very gratitude you're hoping to instill, because he has been wheeled in front of that part of the monument filled with men who, unlike him, didn't make it back. There it is. In that moment, didn't matter what I had written, didn't matter what I envisioned. We did the best we could telling the stories we wanted to tell, and I'm really, really proud of that. But I'm most proud that the crew had the presence of mind to follow me, and that Andy Michael was composed and pleased and self-possessed enough to sit there in his chair and sum up my entire intention in one or two sentences. And when that happens, you either put it in your movie or you don't. And if you don't, what you ought to do is consider a career in accounting or something.
It's so interesting to hear that story, because that's actually one of my favorite parts of the film. And
I take no credit for it.
That is, it really, like you said, it's that Johnny Vance at Freedom Fest moment where, that's the most watched clip on Tuttle Twins. And it's, that came at wow, that's incredible. Like, I'm at a loss of words for that whole story. I had no idea.
It's so powerful to hear the story behind the story. And I think you're onto something, actually, just when you think about that and what our Angel Guild is hungry for. It's this. This is why our live streams actually get the kind of viewership that they get, and they live on, because people want to know the stories behind the stories. And being a guild member, one of the things that happens is we're bringing our guild members into kind of how this all takes place and how it happens. And so if you haven't become a guild member yet, you see Mike here, you see Angel Studios, this is what it means, right? We're getting the story behind the story. And I think you're just laying runway, Mike. I think we're laying runway for takeoff here for the next show that we should be working on together, which is some of these things and hearing how they come together.
Well, the thing that I'm most interested in, and happily the thing that this movie proves, is that we shouldn't be afraid to mix our media if it suits our purpose. And that's why, at first I was a little not quite embarrassed, but I meant it. This is not a documentary, but neither is it a traditional Hollywood release. It's something else. And you mentioned the story behind the story. That's actually been the working title for another project that's super similar to this movie. And I hate to pitch you now with a bunch of people listening, but just so you know, just so you know, those 9 vignettes in the film were pulled from a library of 78 stories that have already been brought to life, either for the big screen or the small screen. But what I want to do with them, potentially, is put them out into the world and then immediately follow them with a conversation like the one we're having right now, possibly even conducted in the studio/office where I'm sitting right now in Santa Monica. Because, in back to the Titanic, right? Imagine being able to see that movie and having the same questions and curiosity you had about the band playing Near My God to Thee, or that I had about the Astors dying with such incredible grace and courage. But rather than going home and diving into the deep end of the pool and having your second screen experience, you immediately fade up to John Astor's great-great-grandson. And we have a conversation about that moment. And we hear something from the horse's mouth, a more reliable witness, an expert, perhaps, right? So I think the advent of podcasting and giving people so much more access to the deep end of the pool. I didn't mean to disparage Joe Rogan earlier when I said, people don't have time necessarily for a 3-hour deep dive. Well, they don't right up until they do. Yep. And that's where we are now. We still have this short attention span theater going on where, the internet has trained us to just keep things moving. But part of the result of that sugar high is a hunger for something more nourishing. And where are we going to find that nourishment? In many cases, it's with a relative low fidelity, just really great conversations with people who are good at talking and want to unpack the thing that we just showed you. So I'm super interested in the story.
I would love to explore that. This is real time, Angel Guild.
Right? I know, we got to get, can we just add a fourth square of Mary? Let's get Mary on right now.
Hey, man, careful what you wish for. She's next door right now making some sort of deal. I don't know what's happening over there.
Oh, man. No, honestly, though, Angel Guild, we're grateful for the Angel audience and what they do. We feel confident, Angel, that there will be so many incredible collaborations between what Mike Rowe is doing with his incredible team and what we are doing. Because, again, when you have these... The way this all came together had a little bit, and I don't want to compare it to this completely because it's just different. It had a little bit of a Sound of Freedom moment, and what I mean by that is Sound of Freedom came together in literally from the time that we had discussions. The contract negotiation took 5 days. We ended up launching in theaters in a record amount of time, and it was this incredible moment. Now this wasn't obviously Mike did the theatrical release first. But the way this all came together, there was miracles along the way of that allowed for between, Johnny coming and talking to you, to Tuttle Twins, to Jeff and Neil joining you on the podcast, and all these different things. And so it's, there's going to be some special things, and we're rooting for Mike and his team because you guys are having such an incredible, powerful impact on the world and getting people to go and jump into the deep end.
It's such a great point, Jordan, and I don't want to suck up too much to the Guild because this is not attractive, but they do need to understand the extent of their power, and I think sometimes you lose things in the periphery. For instance, a month ago, right where this computer is situated now, there was a chair, and in that chair was a bishop called Bishop Martin. Right? I had seen The Sound of Hope. I had heard about, the possum trot story from your brother, but I had kind of forgotten about it. And then I didn't recognize it because, it was The Sound of Hope, and it didn't immediately translate to me. But I watched it anyway, and I was moved, and because Johnny had come up and asked me to sing a song on some cartoon a year earlier, I was now in a position to pick up the phone and call my producer and say, call our guy over at Angel and see if you can get Bishop Martin to come here with his wife. And they did. And the conversation we had reached, I don't know, at least 1 million people.
It was over 1 million. It was, and that was just on that channel. I think there's been, people have clipped it and put it. I mean, it's gone everywhere.
It's everywhere. See, this is the thing about green lighting a thing. It's a lot like a pitcher letting go of the ball. You know, there's a bunch of stuff you can decide with your catcher what you're going to throw. That's all up to you. You know, how you're going to grip it, check your runners, you know, it's all in your hands right up until it's not. And then once you let it go, well, you just have to see what the hitter's going to do and what the umpire's going to say. You got to see if the wind is going to blow, and there are 1,000 different things that can happen, and not all of them are good. But when the good things do happen, you got to take some credit for that too, because you put a thing in motion, and you just never know where those ripples are going to stop. And that's what I meant by, you know, the excitement of all this weird media coming together. And look, again, Paul Harvey's on my transistor radio 40 years ago. He made me miss a plane. And all those decades later, when I'm trying to find something to do, I start writing these stories to pass the time on long-distance transcontinental flights. And those stories somehow turn into a podcast, a book, a TV show, a movie, and then this live stream. It's impossible to know any of that would come to pass, you know? And if I walk the whole thing back to a transistor radio while I'm chopping wood, I can still hear my pop telling me, right, chop your own wood, son. It'll warm you twice.
Oh, man.
All those old lessons, you know.
I love it. I love it. Well, we don't want to keep everybody forever, but again, go to angel.com/stand. Join the Angel Guild. Experience this film, Something to Stand For with Mike Rowe. You will not be disappointed. It is so entertaining, so engaging, so cinematic, but it also has so many great values intertwined in every single element of that entire patriotic film. So, Mike, any last words you want to give to the Guild before we head out?
Thanks. I think you got a tiger by the tail. You know, I think that the reverse commute is something I admire a lot. And I don't care if you're a plumber or a teacher or an accountant or a filmmaker. There are a lot of ways to skin the cat. And when the system is as fundamentally flawed as this one is, opportunities arise. And you guys have a pretty great relationship with your audience, and I'm just privileged to have a small, tiny sliver of it. I'm glad you like the movie, and I hope to make another one.
Thank you, Mike. We appreciate it. David, thanks for joining us as well. Angel Guild members, go to angel.com/stand. You can watch it right now if you're already a member of the Guild. And if you're not a member of the Guild, jump on there, join, and enjoy this incredible film. We're going to close with the trailer, and we hope you enjoy.
My name's Mike Rowe, and this is Something to Stand For. A film that celebrates a few extraordinary Americans who risked everything to build the nation we call home. Americans who gave us something to fight for, something to be grateful for. And today, all these years later, something to stand for. I thought I'd take a trip to our nation's capital, not too far from where I grew up, to reacquaint myself with the memorials and monuments built to honor the people in this film. In other words, it's a field trip. And I'm glad you're along for the ride. Assuming the old truck makes it. It's going to be fine.